I am here with the man, David Cohn, one of the best broadcasters in the business, but also one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Like, I loved watching this dude pitch, and you're going to love hearing from him. We also have Michael Fisher here. Good old Mike, going to be firing away some questions from Codify Baseball, not Codify, right, Mike?
Correct. That's right.
We could find that clip. Now,
Yes.
Tony will never mess this up ever again.
No, we're gonna codify the codify today.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I love about you, and we were talking about this off camera, is there are a bunch of old school guys that just rail on today's technology and today's pitchers. They're just throwers. They don't know anything. Back in our day, we were men and they're, whatevers. You're one of the guys who don't do that. And I love the fact that you take the time to dig in deep to the technology and say, how would I use it today? How are these guys are doing, explaining it to audiences versus crapping on it. Why do you do that? And were you like that as a player?
I guess looking back on my playing career, maybe I was a little skeptical of some of the advanced scouting reports, that was just purely based on the eye test of advanced scouts that maybe saw 2 or 3 games and based their whole opinion on a small sample size. So maybe I was a little skeptical back in the day, but the only thing I can think of is maybe there's just, we were talking before about age bias. The older you get, if you're 50 plus years old, hey, the world was better when I was 25 years old on everything, right? So maybe there's a little bit of that going on, but I guarantee you these pitchers would use the technology if they took the time to learn exactly what's going on with high-speed cameras, or they'd use somebody like Fish right here, as a supplement, or to hire outside sort of counsel, as they say, to get all the information you can so that you could be the best possible pitcher you could be.
I think that's a great point. I'll let Fisher chime in, because if you were saying bias among sample size and all that other stuff, that's what he does. Like, he'll look at everything. Well, I'll let you talk about it, Fisher, and tell me how you would apply something to somebody like, David Cohn back in the day.
Right. Well, what did you do back in the day? You guys at best had binders full of like stuff that somebody in the dugout wrote down, and you tried to remember the 4 times you faced a guy or none. And now we have just the pleasure of not just all of the history, and now we have pitch tracking and we know what every pitch did and all that, but we have the ability to compare someone like you, if you're pitching today, to other pitchers. No one's identical, as you know, but we can say your fastball's a little bit like his and your curveball's a little bit like his, and try to understand, well, what does that mean? And Rob and I isolate pitchers all the time that have like identical fastballs nearly, but they get totally different results. So it's like appreciating, like, yeah, but he's got this killer curveball or this killer slider, or he has a weird motion. So in the old days, what did you do? You had what was in your head, or the team would start to try to tell you that, hey, Chili Davis, had 2 hits off you last time. You got to do something different. Like, yeah, maybe not, because we see lucky home runs all the time. And the best pitchers that work with Codify are the ones that understand when they had bad luck on a good pitch, and they don't go away from that good pitch.
Yeah, that's a great point. Fish. Sorry, excuse me. I didn't mean to interrupt you, man. We used to have those pitchers meetings back in the day, as you said, and they'd say, well, this hitter's really hot and he's hitting sliders, so don't throw your slider to him. And my first point would always be, whose slider? Whose slider did you see him hit? And what about my slider? And how does that fit into this sort of equation?
Right. It wasn't that long ago that there were guys I work with. I won't say the team. I'm not trying to shame anybody, but it was in the last 5 years that they would go into a meeting and they would be handed little intel packets, and they're looking at each other's and they're like, it looks the same. How come our intel is the same against this hitter? Well, you're both right-handed. Like, but I throw 10 miles an hour faster than this guy. Why is it that, it's still, there is still some Stone Age stuff. And some teams have made these big leaps forward, but so fast that nobody understands. It's almost like when you add velo, it's dangerous to add a lot of velo at once. It's dangerous to add a lot of information if you don't understand, like, where did this come from? Because if you don't believe in it, you're not going to use it and benefit from it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, the thing that I've seen talking to pitchers that have used Codify stuff, for example, the confidence that you get out of, and you can speak to this, David. One of the things about pitching is confidence in what you throw. If you have conviction in what you throw, even if it's the wrong pitch, it's still going to probably be better than the right pitch thrown with the wrong conviction. And if you have this in front of you saying this is this guy's weak spot, you have some advantage mentally, I would think.
Absolutely. Spot on. Conviction. This is where the human element plays into it. When you're on the mound in the heat of the battle, it's, do you believe in the pitch? Do you trust your catcher? Are you a Mark Burley style pitcher where you just go with the flow, you never shake off the pitch? Or are you a Chris Bassett style of pitcher who what's the second guess every sequence, or wants to really think through the pitch selection process? So to me, it comes down to the selection process versus the execution process. And if you have conviction behind your preparation and you have belief in the pitch you're going to throw based on all this information, and you feel like you're well prepared, then more likely than not, the human element's going to help you in that regard and help you throw that pitch with more conviction and more confidence.
I think that's the one thing that old school pitchers they get their back up about. Because when you hear technology, you're thinking you can boil everything down to numbers. And this game isn't played by numbers. It's not played by computers. It's played by people. So there is a human element. And it's important to keep baseball people. Like I saw Ron Washington with a fantastic mound visit last week with Amir Garrett. And he just came out there and said, I got this, waved everyone off and walked out there. And you can tell a baseball guy doing a baseball thing to a baseball player. We still have to have that, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the players want to be coached, but they want to trust the information that they're being given. So certainly, everything that Codify is doing is objective information. It can't be denied. It's not opinion based. It's completely objective based on facts. And that once you have that behind you, then the coaching takes place. That's how you hammer it home. And in the heat of the battle, how do you make adjustments inning to inning? That's where the coaching takes place too. And when if it was Logan Webb, who I talked to the other night before his start, he's sort of like, I don't want to be approached by the pitching coach until I cool myself down if I had a bad first inning or a bad second inning. So emotions still play a big part of it. Absolutely. And if you're not receptive to even objective information, or you're not ready to hear it, then it doesn't really matter at that point. It has to be finessed. It has to be coached. And then it has to be sort of believed in.
Webby's one of your guys, right?
Yeah. I'm smiling because of the objective piece. I've had guys call me and like, hey, what's up with this map? I should have more blue here. I'll say Kevin Gosman, who I work with, he pings me it was actually last year, and he's like, they're playing the Nationals. I won't say who the batter is. That's too much information. But he's like, who the hell is this guy? Barry Bonds? Why does he have all this red in this spot? So we dug in, and I'm like, number one, I'm not drawing this with a crayon. This is math. This is science. I'm sorry. I'd love to give you solid blue maps all the time, but sometimes the path of your pitch lines up with the path of his swing better than most. And yeah, he was a little skeptical until I showed him, and then he changed. He's always been a big believer, but he doesn't look at it blindly. He tries to understand all of it, and it's he's a fun guy to work with, because you're like, hey, see that 4 square foot area of blue with your splitter? Just throw it down there somewhere, and you should be good. But sometimes, some guys don't like their maps, and I'm sorry. We're kind of stuck with what you got. We're making the best of what you have, so let's work on that.
Well, speaking of technology, there's one piece of technology that I know you would have loved to have back in the day, and that's instant replay, because you get played more than anybody else on that arguing at first base call with 2 runners scoring. And you were right. Objectively, I've looked at it a million times, zoomed in. You were without a doubt right.
Yes, I was right that he was out. I was obviously wrong that I didn't call timeout first. Whenever I get into that situation, and Jonah Heim with the Texas Rangers had a situation similar. Only one run scored, but he was questioning the call whether it was a foul tip or not, and didn't go get the baseball. So the first thing you do is call timeout the first chance you get. Call timeout before you argue. So if there's any piece of information I can give based on that, it would be that. Yeah, make sure you can argue all you want, but just make sure you call timeout first.
But you typically come around at least once a year on that, so you will never be forgotten for that.
No. Top 5 all-time bloopers, absolutely.
Absolutely. And the crappy thing is you were right. Do you think you had better stuff your day of your perfect game or the day of your 19 Ks?
It was the day of the 19Ks. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, there's a lot of talk about velocity, and the increase in velocity in today's game versus pitchers of the past. And the pitchers of the past kind of take exception to that. Wait a minute, the ray gun, radar, jugs
Mhm.
gun. They're pumping up the radar guns nowadays. Well, no, it's not true. First of all, there is a significant increase in velocity even over the last 10 years or 15 years. We'll call it the Statcast era. I mean, we've seen the jump in
Mhm.
there. Um, we used to use a ray gun back with the Mets, and that was a gun that got sort of a combined reading out of the hand and in front of home plate that meshed the two. And it was about 3 to 5 miles an hour slower than the Jugs gun, which got it right out of the hand. And that day I threw 19 strikeouts. I was on the ray gun. I was 95, 94, 95, which was 96, 97, on the Jugs gun. So that was my peak with the Mets. And then when I went to the Yankees, I lost velocity and threw more breaking balls, spun the ball
Mhm.
more, stayed away from my fastball more. And, this would have been right in line with some of probably what Fish is doing with some of his clients, trying to get them to identify what their best pitches are and try to get to throwing them more, get in a position to get those over the plate more. So certainly I had better stuff and higher velocity when I was with the Mets. And I certainly knew what I was doing with the Yankees and threw more breaking balls and got criticized for it. You become a slider pitcher, you're a breaking ball pitcher now. What happened to your fastball? And well,
Mhm.
I was kind of one of the early adopters of, you know what, my fastball's not as good anymore. So I probably ought to stay away from it a little bit.
Well, I mean, your breaking ball that day of the 19K game was one of the sickest breaking ball days maybe in the history of baseball. And everybody should go back and watch it. But it was like, I mean, did you consider that, like looking at sweepers today, did you consider that a sweeper type pitch?
Absolutely, at times, and this is one of the things I'm fascinated with a lot of the technology. And I had a discussion with Barton Smith, Dr. Barton Smith, about seam shifted wake, because I really feel like, sometimes I threw my slider in a two seam orientation. I had a
Mhm.
two seam fastball with the seams on top, and I just moved my fingers inside a little bit and threw my slider that way since I was in little league. And I really did get some sweeping action because of that two seam orientation, or the seam oriented. It could catch the wind or
Mhm.
catch a seam, and you'd get more break than you normally would. And at times, and I used to call it catching a seam. Well, I must have caught a seam with that one because it really took off right to left. So yes, I did throw a sweeper. I changed my arm angle at times to sort of help with that sweeping action, more horizontal movement. But I was a two seam oriented slider pitcher for years, and people used to laugh at me. You can't hold your slider like that. You have to hold it in the horseshoe. You have to get gyro spin to throw sliders. I'm like, nah, I'm gonna stay with this, and it served me well.
It's funny because I just had somebody comment like, and it's true. The sweeper has been the sweeping slider has been around for forever. I look at Bob Gibson's slider. He threw something that swept across the plate.
Yeah.
We didn't invent a new pitch. We invented a new pitch category because we were able to teach it better. And because of Barton's and looking at
Mhm.
it, and we played baseball for how many years, and nobody thought to think that if the seam stays in the same place as it's rotating through the air, it's going to do something different. Like, that's amazing. And he was able to figure that out. And now we're able to teach it to other people. So we're able to replicate it. And that's why it's a big deal. It's not that it's a new pitch, it's that we can teach it and have it as an alternative. It's not just the grip. Somebody gets lucky and has the grip like you did, like, oh, I always grip it this way, it's going to move. Now we can show people why it moves.
Absolutely, and you can categorize it and compare, and stay in that category and compare one sweeper to the next sweeper. You know who had a great one? Dave Stieb.
Oh
Dave
my
Stieb had
Oh,
God.
an
geez. Yeah.
incredible one.
I would say he has, I mean, arguably the filthiest slider of all time. There are some that you look at and you're like, oh my, like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's like like it got a boogie board, like you're riding the waves, in Santa Monica. Just took a left hand turn and just swept.
Right. But imagine you're developing your sweeper slider, any pitch, and in today's world, you already mentioned a high-speed camera, you have all this information. You could throw pitches in a bullpen session and know exactly what it did. I pitched a little, Rob pitched a little, you pitch a ton, but you throw a pitch and kind of eyeball it and go, yeah, I like how that looked, and you're changing. Like, imagine if you could do both and it had all that science behind it and how quickly you would develop. I mean, the hitters have their own advantages with tech, but the pitchers, I mean, a pitcher that knows how to use the tech has a huge advantage over the old days.
No doubt about it. That's why we see pitchers from year to year, especially relievers from year to year,
Hmm.
just come out of nowhere. Where did the Yankees find Luke Weaver? I mean, where did
Right.
they find Clay Holmes? I mean, the list goes on and on of pitchers year over year that make those kind of adjustments. I mean, I spent my whole life obsessed with spinning a baseball. I still am obsessed with spinning a baseball. I just can't do it anymore. But yeah, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? It's sort of like the Rosetta Stone for me now. It's like, oh, the answers are there. Everything that I thought that I was doing, I now know how this happened and why it happened and how you can teach it and how you can get information to make adjustments. It's absurd to me to think that you wouldn't use that if you're an old time player and you think you wouldn't use
Hmm.
that technology. I mean, my mind is obsessed with spinning a baseball my whole life ever since I can remember.
The one other thing that's jumped out at me and why velo is where it is. Not only can we train velo better, we have weighted balls, we have extreme long toss, which was probably frowned upon a long time ago. But the other thing was frowned upon is strength and conditioning. You always thought pitchers would get too bulky. I don't know what strength and conditioning was like when you were coming up, but I know, like, I talked to Nolan Ryan about it, and he was one of the first guys to do it. And then Tom Seaver was made fun of back in the day for bringing just barbells in, like Atlas. Where are you going with that? So, I mean, like, what was it like back in the day as far as strength and conditioning?
Wow. I mean, when I broke in with the Royals in the 80s, I signed out of high school in 1981 and then finally made it to the big leagues in 1986. And at Royal Stadium, there was not a weight room. George Brett, Hall of Fame third baseman, never lifted a weight his whole career. And I remember one time going to when I got traded to the Mets, I went to Candlestick and they had a small weight room that had sort of a stationary bike in it. And I saw Rick Russell riding the bike the day before he was going to pitch, and he had a cup of coffee and a schmag in his mouth while he was smoking. And I'm like, this is the big leagues. This is the training in the big leagues. It's Rick Russell riding a bike with a cup of coffee and a schmag, and go get him. And he threw like 7 or 8 shutout innings the next day.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that when we look back at velo, there's a reason for the velo increase. Like, if you don't think that strength, explosiveness, and all that plays into throwing harder, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's not just fancier stuff. It's the fact that we actually now know that that matters. And we've looked at it like it's not just genetics. There's a way to teach velocity.
No doubt about it. I mean, just understanding how your body moves through advanced biomechanics is another incredible weapon. And when I was asked about, when I got interviewed for the Yankees pitching coach job before they hired Matt Blake, and rightly so, he was much more prepared than I was. I was asked what I thought was more important. What Mike does, what Fish does, or biomechanics, or a combination of both. And well, I don't know. It's kind of the horse and the cart question, but certainly understanding how your body moves through biomechanic testing is a huge, huge deal, and it's something that we just guessed on. It was Mel Stoudemire was my pitching coach. He would just say, yeah, stay back a little bit more, hold your shoulder in a little bit more. I mean, it was the eye test, and it happened so fast. There's no way you could tell, where your body was or where the inefficiencies were in your mechanics.
So Matt Blake, it's kind of funny because he came up in the same like Twitter group. We all had this pitching Twitter thing going on. It was me, Kyle Bodie, Matt Blake. Who else was it? There's Ben Brewster from Tread Athletics. There's this whole group that we were kind of tight and just passing each ideas back and forth. And it was always fun to see these guys make it. I mean, it was obvious from the stuff that he was talking about, how smart he was and how he looked at the game. But it's also kind of unique that he's not a guy who played at an incredibly high level. He's just a guy who dove really deep into pitching. That's another thing now. You make your own stuff. Like, you don't necessarily have to be amazing. Fisher and I didn't pitch in the big leagues. We can still be influential in baseball, even if we didn't. Where back in the day, you couldn't have.
Massively influential, by the way, because you're backed up by facts. And as I said before, I mean, there's just no denying it. So if you're educated in, exactly what Codify does, or, what you do, Rob, but, on a nightly basis, all the hours you put into it to examine all these nasty pitches and to be able to post them that quickly, that's why you guys have tremendous following. That's why you have the buy-in, which is really the key, because you just can't question the work that you both have put in. You just cannot look at it objectively and say, you know what, I played the game. You didn't pitch at a high level. I'm not going to believe what you say. That's a loser mentality right there, and that's a non-growth mentality. If you have a growth mentality, then you should be open to somebody who puts in the work that you two guys do.
Well, thank you for that. One guy who puts in a ton of work also, who happens to be incredibly talented, who you're intimately familiar with, is Garrett Cole. Like, I have so much respect for that guy because to me, he epitomizes the new school pitcher with old school mentality. He is a bulldog on the bump. He wants to learn everything he can about pitches. And you tell me where I'm wrong, but I also think he intimidates guys. He is an absolute bully looking at somebody, throws gas, but is also really smart and is a very nice guy off the mound. You can see the stuff that he does. Just a really good dude. Am I missing anything there about him?
No, total package. You got it. And also knowing his own body. You know, I think we learned something about Garrett Cole this spring, and that in my day, I would have kept pitching, you know, and that was against my best interest and not the right or the smart thing to do. It's like, just put some ice on it. Give me a cortisone shot. You know, I have to keep pitching. It's sort of like the Monty Python Black Knight, you know, it's just a flesh wound.
Yeah,
just a flesh wound.
I'm going to keep going, you know, but it takes a real maturity to be able to back off and say, you know what, I understand the difference between pain and injury. And that takes an advanced level of understanding yourself. And I think we could throw that on top of everything you just said about Garrett Cole, that he was smart enough to say, whoa, let's stop this right here before I do tear my UCL or before something more serious happens.
Absolutely. I was going to give Fisher a chance to chime in.
Yeah, well, I might shift it off of Cole. I have a question to kind of wagging my tail on because it's so topical.
I see his tail going back and forth. Yeah,
it's so topical with all the guys I work with of you know, these rule changes and how they affect how guys work. But the damn pitch clock, which I'm not saying is bad for baseball, but it has influenced and affected so many pitchers to the point where some of them are just like, I'm not even going to try to influence what I throw now during the game. I'm just going to throw what's called. Which is pretty radical. I'm curious, and I'm sure you've said, I know when Rob and I are clicking through games, we always stop when we hear you on, because you're not the guy that goes, I pitched 2,900 innings, so I must be right. You're like, here's what I think, and here's why I think it. So we always stop on you. I know we both do. But my question is, how do you think you personally would have been affected by and impacted by this pitch clock that we have now? You know, during the game, not and I suppose if it would have affected your prep with your pitch with your catcher.
Yeah, I mean it's hard for me to speak with expertise because obviously I didn't experience the pitch clock, and
Right.
there's a lot of nuance that goes on with that sort of. You know, do you have to run and cover first base and then get back to the mound quickly, and the clock's already ticking, and you know, I think we're still scratching the surface on gamesmanship, and I really believe the umpires could play a big role in this too. If there's a really long inning and the pitcher's running around the field, backing up bases, covering first base, then he could step in front of home plate and you know, kind of give him a few extra seconds, you know, before he starts the clock. So it requires a little common sense that I don't think we have just yet. But yes, if there's a long inning and the pitcher's really kind of getting banged around a little bit, that's when it kind of gets exacerbated and the pitcher becomes sort of a cardio game with the pitcher, and that's when a pitcher gets fatigued, as we know, when fatigue is the number one precursor to a potential injury for a pitcher. So yes, there's still a lot to be sorted through and worked out here. We all know, hey, the games are faster. We get it. We want more action. It's crisper. That's a big part of it. But I think there could be some common sense in the middle of this, and the home plate umpire could run that and say, you know what? It's okay if I take 5 extra seconds right here before I start the clock to allow the pitcher to get back to the mound, get to the rosin bag, gather himself. Okay, now let's start the clock.
Well, how about this? Just related to my question. I happened to talk the other day to Charlie O'Brien, friend of a friend. And I'm like, my friend is like, I know Charlie O'Brien. I'm like, I need to talk to Charlie O'Brien. And eventually I hope he's on here and we could talk about all the guys he's caught, including you. But the question related to my first one is, how much did your catcher influence what you threw during the game? And how much shaking were you do? Did you get into a sink? Did it matter on the catcher? No names. Don't have to say anything about Charlie, but did you feel like a sync with that? And you're trusting, like the catcher's sitting right there next to the hitter. He kind of appreciates how each pitch is working. Or were you more of this guy of there are guys, as you know, that just until they get to the pitch they want to throw and they don't care really what the catcher thinks.
No doubt about it. It's a great question. You know, really the heart of the matter. Charlie O'Brien was my 19th strikeout catcher, by the way. He was behind the dish that day. Love Charlie. There's a trust factor. And throughout the
Mhm.
course of a game, as you guys know from pitching too, there's certain games where, you know what, I trust my catcher. It's like a dance. Okay, you lead, I'll follow your lead. And then there's sometimes where I want to take the lead. If it's a key situation or inning to inning, I feel like my stuff changed, or all of a sudden I have the feel for my slider now, whereas I didn't in the first inning, or my splitter. And, I've got the ball in my hand and I feel it. And it was a little different back then because we didn't throw the ball out every pitch.
Mhm.
I could get a little scuff to work with, gamesmanship. I didn't cheat and put scuffs on the ball, but if I got one, I knew what to
Right.
do with it. So, yeah, there was a lot more variables involved back then, I guess, and then there are now. But with that being said, yeah, if there's a trust factor with your catcher, you will trust him more. But you're right, with the pitch clock, you don't have that veto power quite as
Right.
significantly as you once did. So it's a great point.
It's funny about scuffs because I was talking to Maddox and he said the filthiest pitch he ever threw. It was one to Moises Alou in the Eric Gregg game, and it was a scuff ball. And he said, "Yeah," and I got it back, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is freaking awesome."
Yeah, no doubt about it. I got a scuff one day, and it was the last time I used a scuff ball. Is that I said, okay, I'm going to run a two seamer up and in on McGuire, and then the next pitch I'm going to drop down and throw a slider. Well, that two seamer took off and hit him in the head, and I
Ooh,
knocked him. I
Ooh.
knocked him out of the
Jeez.
All-Star game that particular year, and it was when I was
Oh,
with the
wow.
Blue Jays, and it was awful. It was horrible, and that was the last time I used a scuff ball. But that ball just took off, and that's when it scared me. And seeing him go down was very scary as well.
how scared were you in my one of my favorite face-offs, the Pedro Guerrero one? Pedro Guerrero's a big freaking dude, and no sane person is throwing at the dude. But you certainly look like you didn't care if you hit him, and you had a look on your face like one of these guys were getting murdered, and in your mind, it was going to be him.
Yeah, I was a young pitcher there and playing for the Mets with Keith Hernandez at first base, Wally Backman at second base. It was a hard-nosed group, and I really felt like it was an early provable moment for me, where I could prove myself so I felt like I needed to stand up at that point and prove that I was not going to back down. But yes, you're right. Pedro Guerrero was intimidating. That series, that was a Sunday game. On Friday night, Doc Gooden had hit Alfredo Griffin and broke his wrist. So
Mhm.
there's always a history there. By the time Sunday came around, they were already pissed off because it was the Mets pitching staff. They'd already hit a couple of guys. We've been pitching them in tough all series long, and so that you kind of got to get the background there, and that's why Pedro was so upset with that first pitch up and in that just kind of got away from me up and in, and then he started staring at me, and that's when the test came for me. I'm like, uh-oh, this is a test. And my teammates are watching me. Keith Hernandez is watching me. I better stand up here and prove that I can stand up to, anybody. But yes, Barry Lyons still gets Christmas cards from me, my catcher that day, who got a hold of Pedro before he could get to me.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
Maddox had one of those with Jose Canseco back in the day where he had to hit him. I guess it was Walt Weiss who got hit several times, and Maddox said, "Do you want me to do something about it?" He's like, "Yes." And the first guy up was Jose Canseco, and he's like, "Guess I got to hit Jose Canseco." Like, you guys are freaking nuts. Like, what are you doing? But you're on the bump, and that's the mindset you have to have.
No, it is, and one of the best pitching coaches I ever had was Bruce Keeson, the late great Bruce Keeson, pitched for the Pittsburgh Pirates back in the day, and with the Royals in spring training, we would have a drill. You do your PFP, pitcher fundamental drills, cover first base, bump plays. The last drill of the day was a bench clearing brawl. If the hitter comes to get you, his theory was stay on the mound or walk in front of the mound and then walk back on top of the mound. Make him come up. Use your glove, throw your glove at him. He had all the tricks in the book on how to sort of defend yourself until you could get some help, or until you could get some separation going. But never break your pitching hand. Protect your pitching
Right.
hand. Stay on top of the mound, and then have a good catcher. Hopefully, that gets there quickly.
Try to get another baseball before he gets out there.
Right.
Then it changes the equation.
That's a good
Yes.
point. You never
Right.
want to do the Amir Garrett and just charge the opposing
Oh my
bench.
gosh.
Yeah. No, that wasn't in the Bruce Keeson lesson for the day.
Yeah, no matter what, just go after those guys. You famously also were on SNL. You had a big skit, kind of dressed as a woman. Is you and Boomer, right? I think,
Yes, that's right.
and Derek Jeter.
It was the week that Derek Jeter hosted and did a great job hosting. Lorne Michaels and David Wells were very close. Lorne Michaels took David Wells under his wing. I think because Lorne's a big baseball fan. He sits behind home plate at Yankee Stadium a lot. But I think he saw a lot of Chris Farley or John Belushi and David Wells, similar personalities and
Yeah.
lifestyles, and so he kind of took a liking to him, and he invited us on that show. So yeah, I still have the miniskirt.
Did you get to party with the guys afterwards or do anything fun?
Yes, absolutely. The after party is what it's all about. You're in for an all nighter, and you're happy to do it.
Were you doing the Coney dance too? The old commercial?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun too. That was an Adidas commercial back when George Steinbrenner, kind of broke away from all the other major league owners and did his own sponsorship deal with Adidas. And he insisted we all wear Adidas spikes back then as well. And so they did a big commercial. Yeah, and that was Louis Soho. Louis Soho was my sidekick there, and it took Louis 17 takes to get that line of, "Hey, Coney, why don't you have a dance?" And so that was a lot of fun and a great commercial.
Hey, Connie, why don't you have a dance?
We were talking yesterday about some of the player awards and some players that got pitchers of the month because they had a sexy ERA, but all the peripherals are just not pitcher of the month peripherals. And curious which metrics you kind of glance at on the fly when you're preparing for a game, or just like, how's this guy doing? If you have any kind of go-to stuff. I know there's so many things out there, and there's some metrics that like, okay, that makes more sense, but I don't really totally understand where that's coming from and how that, what does that number even mean? And so can I really use that on a broadcast? I'm just curious what your take is on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the look under the hood, as they say, right, does tell a different story a lot of times. First thing, obviously, right off the top, you look at walk rate and strikeout rate. Those things tend to stabilize, fairly quickly, even in the first 6 weeks of the season. I look at left on base strand rate. That can tell a story, too. I look at home run to fly ball rate. I think I saw that. I had that conversation with Garrett Cole a couple of years ago, the year previous to his Cy Young Award winning season, when he gave up a bunch of home runs. And I was trying to figure out what part of that was random or not, or the percentage of fly ball to home run ratio was extremely high for Garrett that year. And he seemed to think, he's accountable. He's like, I got to pitch better. And I'm sort of like, Garrett, maybe it's just your year. Sometimes pitchers go through years where it's your year where more fly balls leave the ballpark. It's your year to just kind of take it, and then other times it's maybe the quality of the pitch as well. But movement profile is a big part of it. When I'm trying to evaluate a pitcher, I'm trying to evaluate his movement profile, horizontal, vertical, induced vertical break. Certainly everything that you do at Codify, not everything, but certainly, part of that, I would look into some of those numbers and look for tendencies and look for what kind of movement he has. But certainly the luck factor. For years, we'd sit on the bench, and I remember facing Tom Glavine one day with the Mets, and he was giving up rockets all over the place, and we were screaming from the bench, "You're living in a tree, you lucky MFer," and this and that. And of course, I love Glav; he's a Hall of Famer, changeup great. But we can now quantify the luck factor a little better, right? We have that objective information that can tell you who's lucky and who's not. And I can't tell you, the Hall of Fame's full of people who drink way too much because of this issue right here. Who's lucky and who's unlucky, and how did this guy, how did I lose this game? Or Paul O'Neill hitting 4 bullets and going 0 for 4 and tearing up the water cooler, and that sort of thing has driven players crazy forever. And we now have a way to kind of identify those sorts of issues.
So I've heard people get crap on kind of expected stats. And to me, expected stats are really important for exactly that reason. You have guys that are doing everything right and maybe just had bad luck, and guys are doing everything wrong that have good luck. And as a player, you're always taught control the controllables. You can do what you can do, hit the ball hard, throw the ball in your spot. And if it gets hit, that's just luck. But then we get mad at the result, and this helps you not get mad at it. So I don't understand the hesitancy to look at expected stats and say, you know what, this actually helps pitchers' mindsets, hitters' mindsets, and maybe reduces all that, tearing up crap after a game.
It's exactly right. And that this is sort of the old school theory was, that players who extend slumps talk themselves into a slump, and then players that have good streaks, are just great players, right? They just keep on keeping on. Well, no, that's a mindset. There is a mindset. You can work yourself into a deeper slump, even if the process is good, and even if you're doing exactly everything the way you should be doing. And You're reading pitches, you're getting good pitches to hit, you're making solid contacts, you're finding the barrel, your hard hit rate is up, and you don't have a lot to show for it. Yeah, that's frustrating. Yeah, I know we want tangible results. I get it. You want to win games. Certainly that's a big part of it. But you can talk yourself into a deeper slump even if you're doing the right thing.
I totally agree. So you make these little, what happens is players make these little adjustments. Then you're like, oh, I've got to spin it harder. I've got to throw it
Yes.
harder. I've got to hit this spot. I'm not believing the reports I'm getting. A hitter, I want to hit the ball over somebody or do whatever. And then you start making those adjustments. And that's what causes the slump is you get away from it because you hadn't had success. And I think this reduces that to me.
Absolutely. It should.
It should, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It should. That's why I think it's incumbent upon the current players to sort of educate yourself. Even if you're the type of player who can't handle information in the game in real time, that bogs you down. You're not the type of personality or mentality. You don't have that mentality to be able to accept a bunch of information in the heat of the battle and make that usable for you. You still should educate yourself on a lot of this technology so you can understand yourself a little bit better, and therefore not talk yourself into a month-long slump when there's no need for that. Just keep on keeping on and trust the process. You'd be a lot better off.
Absolutely. And there, so I wanted to touch on some pitchers currently for y'all. And like to me, Carlos Rodon, I love his stuff. I think Carlos Rodon has a lot of the bully attitude on the mound. He is a force of nature, throws gas. I think he's had a streak of bad luck, and but I see everything. Like I think his arsenal is rounding into where he was, Cy Young contender type guy. I love his stuff. And I view him as that guy, and I know that he's worked with Fisher too.
Yeah.
Just a tremendous pitcher. What's your takeaway from someone like that?
Yeah. I have a question for Fish here too with regards to Rodon, and I have a very open mind. I'm a believer, or I was a believer, as your career starts to evolve, that sometimes developing more weapons is a good thing for the future. But right now, his two pitches, he's always been dominant at the top of the zone and that wipeout slider down, and maybe he should just stick with that more often. But he's developing a changeup. He's developed a cutter. I think that will serve him well on down the road. But I saw him the other night, pitching in Baltimore, and he threw one changeup, and Westberg drilled it in the gap, and that was it. It was shit canned at that point. The changeup went in the back pocket. It kind of cut. It was a low quality changeup, and that's the quandary, Fish. I mean, do we stay with his strengths, or do we continue to kind of bring it along so that one day that changeup will be there?
It's maybe the number one topic with Codify guys is like an off-speed pitch, particularly to same-handed batters, as it turns out, that's like taboo. But they get away from it and they don't throw it enough. And then to your point, like how do you command it if you throw it twice a day and you're depending on the outcome of it rather than the quality of the pitch? He's been over the years that we've worked together, been focusing a lot on expanding his arsenal. Excuse me, but he's got to go to the bread and butter when he needs to, and somehow he's still underrated.
He is.
I mean, I don't think people appreciate the injury last year and what it meant to him, and he probably shouldn't even have pitched as much as he did. But my God, just look at a little bit of old film. Look at his metrics now versus then. I mean, this guy is a complete beast. But there's a lot going on between the ears. There's still evolution there, and we see the growth curve of, you have your physical curve, and then you have your mental curve that happens later. And he's, kind of in that sweet spot where he is still learning and still has the physical capability. So it's an ongoing thing. I mean, especially when you have those two, that good 1-2 punch, and you're like, man, when do I use the third one? But Rob and I talk about it all the time. We talked about it how many times yesterday. I think we were talking about Hunter Green. Yeah. Like, just throw this pitch 10 to 15% of the time, get it in and just get it in the hitter's head. But these pitchers, I know from talking to them, these pitchers hold that third and that fourth pitch up to the first two and go, it's just not as good.
Yeah.
And especially an off-speed pitch, we're like, of course you can't throw it exactly where you throw your fastball or all that. You're going to have a bigger spray pattern and all that. It doesn't matter. The batter is screwed if he can't guess as often as he does right now.
Exactly. The mystery, the biggest element, one of the biggest elements for a pitcher is mystery, right? You
All
throw a
right.
pitch and the hitter's shaking his head and he's looking at this pitch hitting coach and saying, he doesn't throw that pitch. What happened? Now you got into his head. Now you got a little mental warfare going on. And that's a huge weapon for any pitcher to have.
Yeah.
Right. Unless you're Mason Miller, and then you can just
Yeah. Right. Just
Right.
shove and
There
it's
are
like,
yeah.
even then though, I mean, he could throw all fastballs and you're still going to have trouble, but
Yeah.
he still is mixing pretty well.
but the
He
funny
threw, what,
thing,
40% sliders, I think, right?
Yes.
Something like that.
the funny thing is I used to compare Tarek Skubal to Carlos Rodon. Like I thought that was what Tarek Skubal could be. Now I'm reverse comparing it because Rodon could be Skubal right now
Yes.
is, oh my God. Like that
Yes.
dude is absolutely, I mean, I think he's the best pitcher in the AL right now. He's just really good.
No arguments here. He punched out 12. He punched out a dozen Yankees. A little bit unlucky, in that game, and the Tigers got swept. But it was like, wow, that might be the best left-hander in the game going right now, or one of them.
I love what he did with Aaron Judge too when he turned around and he even said after the game, he's like, "Man, you were just a great ball player because I can't get you out." Like, did you ever have somebody like that you ran into that you were just like you're just like, "Man, I don't know what you do, but you're just awesome."
Yeah, it's exactly what Fish said before about, sometimes your pitch plane just matches the swinger's swing bat pass, so it happens. Absolutely. It happens. A guy I just could not get out, it's certainly not big right-handed hitters, Jose Canseco, Mark McGuire. Thank you. I'm going to have a variety, a breaking ball package for those guys, but Milt Thompson was a left-handed hitting outfielder for the Phillies back in the day. He kind of he was Juan Soto light. He had that kind of wiping inside out kind of swing, power the other way. Certainly not on Juan Soto's category at all, but similar stylistically. I could not get him out. I tried to pitch him in. He'd fight me off. I'd throw him off-speed pitches that was right to his bat path that he pulled it. So I just could not figure out how to get Milt Thompson out. So there's always guys like that, usually a left-handed batter for me. But he was right up there. He comes to mind.
And speaking of Mason Miller, y'all have an amazing close. Like Clay Holmes the other day was like, I did an overlay of Clay Holmes's stuff, and it reminded me of like prime Blake Trinan, which I don't say lightly at all. Prime Blake Trinan was the filthiest pitcher on earth. And right now, Clay Holmes is among the filthiest pitchers on earth. What have you seen with him?
I see a really intelligent pitcher who understands how to use the technology. Fish, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to talk to Clay Holmes, but he would be right down your alley. He understands exactly spin axis, how his seams need to be oriented to get the right type of movement on his sinker and his slider for that matter as well. And he's got a 1-2 punch that is devastating, that he has extreme confidence in either one. He's not just a sinker ball pitcher anymore. He's got 2 pitches that are well above average, and he understands how to make adjustments quickly based on the technology. He knows exactly how his ball is spinning out of his hand. He'll get the information immediately, and he'll make quick adjustments that way, and he knows where he needs to be in terms of whether you want to call it seam shifted wake or seam orientation. He gets it. And he's a smart dude.
He worked with Tread Athletics back in the day, who actually my son was Tread Athletics' first remote. I know Ben for a long time. And I was like, the only guy I'd let my son work with actually, externally. And it was just, and then Ben's just taken off and doing great stuff. I know Clay Holmes is one of his guys. What do you see on Clay Holmes's charts, Fisher, other than a lot of blue?
Oh, a lot of blue. I do find myself wishing that someone like David would connect us because the blue,
I like it.
It's true though. The blue does kind of shift from batter to batter, and I don't really expect that matches what his strategy is. It happens a lot. Guys have a fundamental blue. This is blue to 95% of the guys. I don't need to see a Codify map to know that. But there are other times like Milt Thompson, like Kevin Gausman with Barry Bonds on the Nationals. Like sometimes it just doesn't line up that way. And it's nice to be able to have the information ahead of time instead of having to learn the hard way of, oh crap, this guy is going to hit this pitch because my pitch is staying right in his bat path for 3 times or 4 times or 5 times longer. Oh, by the way, you see this technology that's coming from StatCast on the bat tracking?
Yes.
It's gonna be revolutionary. Because right now,
they can track swords, so that's why I'm excited.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, Right, but here, I mean, it's so important to know, like, a guy swung, was he early, late, above
Totally.
it, below it, and like we try to stitch it together here, but we don't have the bat tracking, so we go, well, the guy missed it, and he pops up a lot more than he grounds out up there, so he probably swung under it, but we don't have to guess that anymore, and that's
That's a
just
great point.
another huge quantum leap forward in map making, for instance, and strategizing against a batter.
And also pitcher matchups for managers to have that
Yeah.
information, because
Oh yeah.
it's not about, oh, this guy's 3 for 9 off of this batter. Oh, that Davey Johnson in the '86 World Series. I got to bring in Jesse Orozco because this guy's 3 for 9 off of Roger McDowell. No, it's all about
Right.
what you're talking about about matching up, the path of the pitch and the path of the bat.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it helps complete the picture. Because I think sometimes we get this technology, we're so excited to use it, but we even don't have the full picture. And now this gives us another piece. Another thing we can help us determine, I think, and this is the one thing we don't determine really well based on statistics and based on technology, is deception. Because there are two pitchers that can throw the exact same pitch, and one is going to get hit harder than the other because they're doing something that is deceptive to the hitter, either where the hitter's standing, how the hitter's looking at you, how you're showing the ball, and he's picking it up early from you, but not from others. I heard TJ Antone talk about Nick Lodolo, who to me is, one of the filthiest guys around right now. And he was saying, playing catch with him, you can see how he hides the ball, that I couldn't tell what was going on and it was impossible to catch it. But we don't know that from the stats that we have. So maybe you can tell from the bat pat if a guy was early, late, consistently, something like that.
It's so true. I mean, a lot of the analytics people in the Yankees department asked me that question. God, that's one of the first questions. What is deception? How, what to you? How can you teach it? How do we measure deception? And it's so tricky. I'd be interested in Fish's, opinion on this as well. But yeah, I mean, Zach Greinke, who brings the ball right down behind his backside and keeps it there and brings it right back up, and you don't see it till he releases the ball. I that's part of it, I guess. Timing. It's hard to say. It really is hard to say. You know it when you see it. Like Sid Fernandez was one I thought was with the
Exactly.
Mets, who he threw 88 to 91 on the old ray gun that I mentioned before, but he got underneath the ball and kind of almost pushed the ball and had incredible induced vertical break on his pitches, and he'd throw a belt high right there all day long, and nobody could hit it. They'd pop it up, they'd swing through it, and then he had a big slow curveball that came out of nowhere. It looked like it was going in the dugout and backdoored around a right-handed batter. So I know he had deception because he got underneath the ball, probably similar to what Nestor Cortez does, how he
Yep.
gets his induced vertical break. And for years, pitching coaches taught us, no, you got to get on top. You got to drive the ball downhill. Like hitters, you got to swing downhill. And, there's a lot of different ways to get it done. So I don't know, Fish, if you come up with anything that you can quantify deception or.
I know we've talked about it.
Well, in a way,
Yeah.
We have all this information and we create these maps and these predictive formula to try to guess what's going to happen. Okay. So you have all these things, exactly what the baseball did. You kind of know what the bat did. All this, what you know. You also have what you don't know. And so we'll run a map for a guy and watch it over time and go, this guy's doing better than all the things that we know indicate. So I don't want to say too much because every time I open my mouth, I inspire people to go do what I'm doing and try to take what I'm doing away. But there is a fudge factor in Codify maps that over time looks at how you were predicted to do based on what we knew and said, you're doing better, you're doing worse. Maybe you're, like, here comes the ball, and like all your stuff is good, but there's something missing, and it's not luck. And it's hard. It's hard to isolate luck from there's something actually here. Maybe I can't measure it, but it's happening. So we do have that. There's been a couple pitchers early on who are just like, why am I not having success here? And they changed how they were tipping a little bit. I mean, how do you quantify that? I mean, it's such a real thing, but if you're doing it, you're in deep trouble. Trying to isolate it's not necessarily unmeasurable, but it is to us right now. But it exists. And if you ignore it, you do so at your own peril. So we have a fudge factor in there. And it, what does it represent? You hope it represents some deception, but it also represents some other things.
Yeah, this is a thing that I've talked to MLB about. I've talked to other folks about, like, how are we going to be able to figure this out? Because to me, that is we have all this stuff, and then the big question mark. There are ways to like read brains. Like you can tell when a hitter's brain is stimulated and they're picking, not like read their minds, but we're just reading like their brain about when they see the pitch, when they pick it up.
Right.
A bat path can be, or when they start their swing can be a core, some kind of proxy for that, I think. So that's one of the things you can do. Also just taking similar pitches. We group all the pitches from every pitcher together and say, this guy's having more success than we would think. Right. And that's what you would do.
Right. What I'm doing right now is going to look Stone Age to me in 2 years, because you will be able to do what you're saying is like, I can see the bat. I can sync it with when the pitch was released. And I know I can measure to the millisecond how he twitched, how he moved, how he reacted. And now you can start to get a handle on, okay, why did that guy do that against that pitcher and not the guy that throws just like that, in terms of velocity and acceleration and movement and all that, because there's some extra thing. You'll be able to get a better handle on it very soon. And that's going to be earth shattering to some guys. I mean,
it is in scouting.
It's just insane.
Yeah. Teach it, right? How do you teach it, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's that. Yeah. Right. But appreciating that to the minor league kid who, well, he's doing well, and he has, he doesn't really have the metrics. So, how come this guy's only throwing 92? So I don't know. Let's take the guy that's throwing 95. That happens all the time. It's like, that guy's getting guys out. Just because you don't know why doesn't mean you shouldn't be promoting them.
And you know why that is? It's because nobody wants to lose their job by saying, he's got this deception. He just knows how to pitch. Because then it's you making that decision. You're the one saying, this guy knows how to pitch, versus this is what the radar gun says. This is what all the metrics say. Yeah. So this is the guy I want to draft, or I want to recruit at a college. If we can measure it, then we can actually encourage it. And then that turns people into more pitchers than throwers. So we're taking technology and promoting guys that maybe wouldn't have made it. Seam shifted wake's another thing that it adds movement to pitches without spinning it tremendously, without throwing particularly hard. It gives people chances to have careers that might not have the genetic makeup of others. So I think that's a great thing technology can do. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Without a doubt. It gives people a chance, right? It gives people a chance to move up a level, high school to college to pro ball to the big leagues, without a doubt. And the question is can it be taught, right? All these issues we're talking about, all these things we're talking about, and some of them are hard to quantify. And I thought, Fish, you brought up a good point. In 2 years, there's going to be Stone Age, because that's it. You either get on the train or you get left behind as far as moving forward with understanding technology, using technology, because it's rapidly expanding, rapidly changing, growing, getting better. So it's you're on the bus, Gus, or you're gone. You missed it.
I know when Hawkeye came out, all the teams got these, mountains of data from it. And, the average team has 100 and whatever analysts. And they're just like, okay, now what? We can track every player, not just the ball, but every player. A guy goes like this, he's in right field, the ball went over there. Like, we track everything, but you need to turn that into usable information. So there's still teams still very, very much on the learning curve of what they got 4 years ago. So, I know that some of the teams that you would say have the best analytics, there are huge fights within the organizations, because we're all human. We know you worked for this company or that company, and it's just the nature of the beast. But just because they have 100 people and they spend billions of dollars, doesn't mean that they're effectively turning all this information into something,
or translating it to the players.
Or translating, right? So many players. Right? This is a huge downside of having 200 people in your analytics group. We can't let 200 people talk to Shohei. So no one's going to talk to Shohei. It all goes through this, or whoever. I'm just picking a player, but most analysts are forbidden to talk to the players, and it all comes down often through the coaches. And the players like, "What the hell is this? Where did this come from? Explain this to me." And they're like, "No, that's not how this works. So you're going to use it,"
right?
Meaning, or I don't know. And there's not that thing. That's the nice thing here. Not to plug, but at least when you call here, you get a straight answer. Like, this is why it is the way it is. And that's missing in baseball. And that's really held back a lot of organizations from going. At
No
least
doubt
have
about
one.
it.
Yeah.
At least have one guy that's your liaison with your R&D, your analytics, and your players to be a human element and explain it, and not just have this mysterious like, why is that red? What does that even mean? What the hell is WOBA?
Right. Exactly.
You know?
Well, and I think the bad part about it is that's where you get people distrusting analytics. These guys don't, you have people that can't communicate them, so they just assume the information is garbage. The best people are baseball people that understand the analytics and can explain it to a player in a way that they understand. And I know, Fisher, you do that all the time. I know, Coney, you do that for the entire audience of folks. Like, people can discount this stuff like, blah, 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 StatCast, blah, blah, but you make it real for them, which I think is the most important thing and why fans enjoy the broadcast.
Well, thank you. I mean, that is my objective every time, is how, and first of all, I don't get into, it's hard in a broadcast. You only have so many times to pigeonhole in a thought, and you get in, it's hard to expound, on something technical. And if I don't fully understand it myself, I'm not going to get into it. So I try to just give boilerplate type stuff and continuing to educate the fan base about why this is important, what I would use, what I had when I pitched that I didn't have, why I'm jealous of some of this new technology and what I wish I could have had, and why it means something. And to be able to do that quickly in between pitches or in between innings or between one inning to the next is hard. Very hard thing to do on a broadcast. But I still think it's really important to be able to continue to educate the fan base as to why this is important, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't doing that, because every front office is doing this. And if I'm covering the game and I'm not touching on this subject matter, then I'm doing a disservice to the game, because this ain't the game that that your grandfather watched. It's a different game. There's different elements that go into it. There's different information that go into it. And for me, it's really, as I said, there's light bulb moments for me. I use the term Rosetta Stone, because of my two-seam slider, that now I understand why my slider did what it did, because of this new technology that a professor out at Utah State, did it with a cannon, and identified seam shifted wake. So, to me, that was an exciting moment for me. And it sort of, it lit me up and answered a lot of unanswered questions that I had during my career that I couldn't quite figure out.
This is a funny segue to that, though, because Barton Smith, I had actually found him. So because I get obsessed, I go down rabbit holes all the time. And I was looking at two-seamer movement. I saw what Driveline was saying, laminar flow, blah, blah. And I saw a paper that Barton wrote and a presentation he gave. And I'm like, dude, this is what they're saying. What do you think? And then we started talking. I'm like, I'm going to put this on Twitter to let everybody know there's another thought. And then eventually I said, the next thing I'm going to predict is some team is going to hire Barton, because there's so much you can do with seam shifted wake that somebody's going to want to experiment themselves. And sure enough, they did, which was fantastic. But it was like this weird obsession. I don't know. I love the game so much that I want to like find out everything. And I think that's important. Like Fisher was just saying about, in 2 years, the game's going to be, we might discover some other force on the baseball. We might discover deception. Bat path stuff's useful. And if we close our mind to technology and say, oh, it's better back in the day, I'm going to not keep up with this, you're going to be left behind. You wouldn't have a business at Codify if that happened.
Right. You just made me think about another question. It's the automated zone.
Oh, yeah.
And how that's going to change. When is that coming? And this thing that keeps challenges, it's continually ignored. And I feel like it's just because I'm being stupid and everyone's being nice and not telling me I'm stupid. But the top and the bottom of the zone in the minors, it's entirely based on the batter's height and not on his stance. And they're like, don't worry about it. We'll figure that all out. But no one, it's been a couple of years now, and no one has changed how that's going to work. And it's hard for me to imagine like a Juan Soto who has a postage stamp strike zone because of his stance, completely legitimately. If that's suddenly based on his height, we just tacked on a couple inches to the top that other guys didn't get. Like a Cody Bellinger is already used to a giant strike zone because he doesn't bend down and get it. What's up with that? Is it just, are people just being nice to me and not saying I'm being silly, or is this a legitimate issue?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Strike zone's been an issue forever, right? So no, of course it's a legitimate issue. Identifying the strike zone, and what, when I talk to Maddox or Glavin or Smoltz, about our strike zone. And if you go back and look at the '96 World Series, it was one of the first World Series that Fox produced that had the overhead cam that actually showed the how east and west, how many pitches
Right.
off the plate we were getting at that particular point, and it was a lot. And I benefited from that a lot. I threw a number of backdoor sliders that never got to home plate that broke around the plate. And the catcher framed it just off the plate, and strike three, go sit down. And I was the benefit. I benefited from that enormously. But I also didn't get the high strike called either. I mean, we see.
Right.
I think the strike zone's kind of like my strike zone was an east and west iPhone. And nowadays you turn the iPhone, north and south, and that's kind of the strike zone nowadays. The ball's 1 inch off the plate, and everybody's screaming at home nowadays because they have the little white box in front of home plate. So yes, Fish, the strike zone has always been the issue. It has from day one. How you identify it, where we want it to be, the batter, Eddie Goodell. I mean,
Right.
it is a huge issue. So no, you're not crazy at all. It's something that we still struggle with today. Where do you want it to be? And everybody's got a different opinion.
I'm a little crazy.
He is a little crazy. Hey, if Aaron Judge knows what his strike zone is going to be, it's over. Like, he gets hosed more than any player in baseball on called strikes, and he knows it, but there's nothing anybody does about it. But if you have an automated strike zone and he knows exactly where it is, what's going to happen? That man's going to hit like 500 home runs in a year. It's crazy.
Well, they're still going to pitch him low, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think the turnaround time on the challenge system is pretty quick in the minor leagues. We've seen it. Just go to the Wimbledon in tennis, and you see how quickly it happens in tennis and major tennis events, and how the crowd gets into it. So I think, without a doubt, if we don't have a challenge system next year, I'll be shocked. Full robo-umps, I don't know yet.
Right.
Right.
I agree with that.
We were marveling at Paul Skeens, who chucks a 101, and he's following through and challenging in one motion. It's like, I don't know where your head would be and where your eyes would be flapping around if you threw 101, which of course we can't, but just like max effort. Like, it's sure as hell isn't knowing that a seam caught the zone.
Plus the drinking games, man. The drinking games.
Right.
Is it going to be overturned or not? You can have that throughout the whole game.
Yes.
So one more pitcher from the Yankees, Nestor Cortez, amazes me because, you watch a guy and he's the epitome of a craftsman. We have the guys that throw, and it's obvious to tell why they're successful. And then you have a guy like Nestor Cortez, who's just, amazingly deceptive or whatever. What causes that? Fisher, what do you think it is with Nestor?
Every pitcher, why do we see any of these pitchers? Because they're unique. So what's unique about him? And you see his delivery. That you don't prepare for that, and except for when you see him. It's a unique thing, and he embraces it. He hasn't tried to change who he is and all that. So the path that those pitches take is unique, and he doesn't have to throw 97 to 60.
Do you have different charts? Do you have different maps for him? Like if he drops down, for example, because he has that drop.
Yeah, I have to. Right. He poses the problem. Guys that consciously alter their release, I have to run like multiple sets of maps for what if you do the same thing with guys that move around on the rubber.
Like Bassett might be amazing to look at because
Bassett's my demo guy. Every time I make new maps, he's the guy. I put him and Darvish through because it's like if the system can handle Darvish and Bassett, it can handle anything.
Yeah, pretty much. That's definitely the case. We were just talking about Nestor, who's one guy who, like, normal fans, number one, he's enjoyable. I love his antics and changing that's what baseball's about. We had Luis Tiant back in the day, and all these guys that had Satchel Paige even had all these different windups. And why would people scream at Nestor? Opposing fans do. They're like, it's a gimmick. Like, I love the drop down pitch. I love all the stuff he does and the confidence he pitches with. What do you think makes him successful?
He is, to me, obviously you see a lot of late swings on his fastball, even though it's 92 miles an hour. So he is a sort of kind of a poster child for the difference between velocity and movement. His induced vertical break is surprising to a lot of hitters. They pop it up. They're constantly late on it. He's fearless with it in the strike zone. He's uber aggressive with it. He probably is with Garrett Cole out, he's probably the best starter with the best chance to give innings to get deeper into the game because his pitch count is usually under control because of his aggressiveness in the strike zone. And he has just, 80% is either fastball, four seamer, or cutter. And that's it. It's a 1-2 punch. And occasionally he'll drop down. Yes. And for the element of surprise, but I just think that he just surprises a lot of hitters with his fastball. They're late, they pop it up, they swing and miss it, and it gets a lot of the plate the majority of the time. It's not like he's Greg Maddux, painting down and away with everything. He's like, here it is, hit it if you can, and hitters are consistently late on that fastball.
I'll tell you, I think it was Jason Benetti last game who was calling him. Who's one of my favorite guys to listen to. Like, I'll watch games just to watch him talk. But he was glowing about Nestor and just about how good he was, and just like, oh my God, he's hitting all his spots. He's doing all, like, he's almost the anti today's game with the heart, these horses throwing tremendous velo, but yet he can be successful today, which is great.
It is great. It's certainly a case study in, sometimes high velocity. Obviously, we'd all love high velocity. If we three were pitching in the big leagues, you're going to turn down 98. Here's Garrett Cole's fastball. No, I don't want it. I want Nestor Cortez's fastball, So, of course, we'll take the velocity. We all know what that means. But with that being said, yes, there's an aggressiveness to the way Nestor pitches. Hitters are constantly on the defensive. Position players are constantly ready to field because he doesn't mess around. Umpires are really ready to call strikes because he's right there in the strike zone consistently. One thing leads to another. We talk about sequencing of pitches, being so important. Well, style matters. It matters to everybody because everybody's on their toes. They know Nestor's pitching. Umpires are raising their right arm. The second baseman and shortstops are on their toes, ready to make plays. It matters. Style matters.
My last question is, I know your dad was very influential in your game. What do you see in youth baseball? How would you encourage fathers out there to help their kids along in sports or whatever they do? What were the great things that you took from that relationship? Unless I'm reading it wrong, I don't think I am. Just give me a little bit of background, as well as like what you would advise people to do if they're listening to this. Hey, this is the way I would treat my kids or my youth baseball.
Well, and I know it's much more difficult nowadays with just the nature of travel ball and privatized, the way the game's become privatized for the little leagues. I would still encourage other skill sets from other sports if possible. I think that's an underrated facet, and that's just my own personal opinion. I can't really base it on anything, other than my own personal experience, but playing basketball, playing football or soccer or whatever it is, other sports, to me there's skill sets in there to be had, both emotionally and physically. And also it guards against burnout. And that's probably the one thing I would be careful with young kids in burnout at an early age. Because no, you got to do this. You got to travel here. We got to pack up the car. We got to drive 4 states over to go participate in this tournament because it's good for your future. And you're 12 years old. And at some point, there's an emotional burnout. So that's what I would guard against most. Technically speaking, there's a lot of great pitching coaches out there that know more about mechanics than I do. Certainly, you can get great coaching. You can go to people like Fish, and get great information. Certainly on the pro level or even the amateur level, depending on the technology, the access to technology that he has based on your schedule. But emotional burnout would be the number one thing I would worry about with kids nowadays, and guard against that and make sure that they're allowed to be kids. You can have fun too. You don't have to play all year round one sport and travel multiple states and disrupt the whole family. Happiness is important. Emotional stability is important.
Well, I will tell you one thing that I got from someone like you, Darvish, who told me that the reason why he throws lefty sometimes, and the reason why when he's playing catch, even he uses different mechanics, is he wants to kind of feel how his body moves. And he thinks the body gets bored if you do the same thing over and over again, you don't improve, which is the same thing with playing other sports that you get. It's a feel for how you move, and you can take some of that and put it in the game. Plus, you don't get bored mentally or physically, and I think it's just good. It's just good advice for everybody.
Yeah, agreed. Could not agree more. Especially when you're at that age, that vulnerable age too. You're going through puberty. You're trying to get strong. You're trying to develop some sense of your body and how your body works and moves. And this goes right to the heart of biomechanics, right? You're still growing. You're still developing. So allow that to happen, instead of, pigeonholing. One thing that I was anti my whole career was cloning. You have to do it this way. You have to hold the ball cross seam. You have to have these kinds of mechanics. No, you don't. That's what I love about today. I mean, Logan Webb's a prime example of that. Throwing the ball, changing his arm angle, and doing what's more natural to him was a huge benefit. So,
Right.
I'm anti-cloning all the way around, and that kind of used to be the way back in the day. Was you got to do it this way. You got to stand on the rubber here. You got to drop and drive like Tom Seaver. You have to do it like this guy. No, I'm not like that guy. My body's not like that guy. I can't move like that.
That is such a great point, because that's what we look for nowadays. We look for the outliers, not if everybody's doing it, you're just going to look the same to a hitter. Devin Williams told me his changeup was frowned upon in the minor leagues because it didn't have a low enough spin rate. And I'm like, it's the best, arguably the best changeup of all time. I would argue with people on that. I mean, Pedro, obviously, but Devin's got a ridiculous changeup, the airbender. And he was told it wasn't going to be a good pitch because it spun too much, but he's an outlier. And we take away that by cloning people and saying, you've got to look like this because we think, that's going to help you be successful, right?
Right. We try to put it into a bucket instead of just saying it's a pitch. It's Devin Williams throwing this pitch. It's its own thing. Everybody's unique. But we've spent our baseball lives trying to put everybody into buckets and categorize them and treat them the same. No, the pitchers that you see are all different, and you're seeing the very best at whatever they do. And they got there because they do something unique. Maybe it is just velocity, but it's probably, there's probably more to it.
Absolutely. Do you have any other questions, Mr. Fisher?
No, thanks so much for talking to us.
I was going to make a puberty joke about your sense of humor going through puberty, but still hasn't gotten there.
Fisher through puberty those were dark days.
We spent all spring training together, or at least a few days together, and it was a mess.
I can imagine. Sorry about my hand shaking here. My battery ran out on my phone here.
Oh, dude,
you're good
for keeping you so long.
Shaking on you here.
But dude, it was great. Thank you so much for coming on, and keep up the great work.
Oh, you're the best.
Thank you. You too. I'm a big fan of you guys too, as you know. So this was a great conversation. Love to do it again.